Grape is mixed with ginger.
What was in the?
That was.
Thank you everyone for coming. I usually do the introduction, but I don't think that side of the room needs an introduction for Liz, our library manager, but this is Liz, our library manager, and she's going to be talking about Welch's Way, so advertisement during the temperance movement. So after that, I'm just going to let Liz take over here.
Yeah, hi everyone. My name is Liz Schmidt. I'm the library manager here at the museum. And this is the research that I did during my master's program. I did at Loyola University in Chicago. If my master's program required me to write a thesis, this is what I would have written it on. But we did have to do an extensive academic research project. So I decided to write it about how the Welch's Grape Juice Company used the temperance movement to sell their grape juice. So let's get started here. And let's first just talk about what the temperance movement was. A lot of the time, people are like, what is temperance? What does that mean? So simply, it's a social movement for people who wanted to stop drinking alcohol. They wanted to convince people to stop drinking alcohol and to promote a temperate lifestyle. So there are really two distinct periods in the temperance movement. The first one is from 1826 to 1860. And now I define the temperance movement here as this social movement and not necessarily people who are just saying you should stop drinking alcohol because that was happening for centuries. But as far as the social movement in 1826, the American Temperance Society founded, and this really grew alongside what historians call the Second Great Awakening, which was this movement of kind of evangelical movement towards more Christian perfection, Christian holiness. There are lots of fun words here. But ultimately, one of the ways to live a holy life is to also live a temperate life. So these two movements grew alongside each other. And by 1833, the American Temperance Society had over 1 million members. In the 1840s, saw a distinct decline in alcoholism in the United States, and that resulted in many different states and counties passing dry laws, such as Maine did in 1851. So my next gap here is 1865 to 1933. Now, does anybody know what was happening in the United States from 1860 to 1865?
Civil War.
The Civil War, yeah. So a lot of people were a little busy during the Civil War here. So during that time, a lot of temperance organizations kind of fell apart, where they kind of decided that temperance needed to be put more on the back burner, rather to face more urgent things, such as abolitionism and the Red Cross, and just focus on home during the war front, mostly at this time. And during the Civil War, one of the rations that many soldiers received was alcohol, a lot of the time straight liquor. And that resolved to many people forming habits of drinking alcohol. And then those habits formed into kind of escapism to escape the horrors and devastation that they witnessed during the Civil War. So following the Civil War, there was another path to temperance, which started around the 1870s. Particularly with the Women's Christian Temperance Union. And I'm going to talk about them on and off throughout this presentation, mostly because I've worked pretty closely with their archives. Hi guys. So the Women's Christian Temperance Union was led by Frances Willard, who was a pioneer in temperance, especially for women. And it was the largest women's organization in the world in 1890. And the WCTU served as an entry point for women into politics. With this platform of protecting their home from the dangers of alcohol, it allowed them to enter the political sphere without kind of tipping off the men that they were actually entering the sphere. And that allowed women to become skilled in oratory and forming arguments, and really kind of paved the way for them to go into other things such as suffrage, which was also a big thing that the WCTU did. So the WCTU was effective at recruiting women and producing persuasive material, but what we now know as Prohibition did not really become a national stride until the Anti-Saloon League. So the Anti-Saloon League started in 1893, and it was really their lobbying that passed Prohibition in 1919. Together, those were fiercely focused on Prohibition between 1900 and 1919, and Prohibition lasted from 1920 to 1933. So just like another quick note that temperance certainly existed long before these periods, certainly in other religious groups that banned alcohol and completion, but these groups in particular banned alcohol, or they didn't want to ban alcohol, they more wanted to seek social change, which is that really distinct difference here. So when we look at the temperance movement, there are really two really true truths for temperance advocates. These are non-negotiables. One, that drunkenness is a sin. This is the foundation for many of these groups is Christianity, and Christianity says drunkenness is a sin. Therefore, liquor causes a danger to society. So they saw a very distinct snowball effect here, is that liquor causes drunkenness, and drunkenness causes disorderly behavior, such as gambling. And when you gamble or you spend all your money on liquor, then you're going to lose all your money. And then you're going to come home and beat your wife and children, and then you're just going to leave your family destitute. And so that is the slippery slope that was quite literal for them. This here is called the Drunkard's Progress. It's a very famous print from 1846. So here it says that the first step is just a glass with a friend. The second step is just a glass to keep the cold out. Then step 3 is 1 glass too many. And then you're drunk and riotous. And then step 5, the summit is attained, jolly companions, you are a confirmed drunkard. Now as we go down, step 6, poverty and disease, and then you are forsaken by your friends, you turn to desperation and crime, culminating in death by suicide. That 1 glass with a friend is gonna lead to suicide here. That's a non-negotiable. And you can see here in the very center is the thing that truly matters in the minds of people advocating for temperance, and that is the family. Is this nuclear family is not only the center of everything that matters, but it's the future of the country ultimately. So as we look into some of the things that Welches advertise, there is this continually going back to the wife and children here. So let's go back a little bit and we'll talk about the WCTU. And I would argue that they certainly supported Prohibition, but I would also argue that it was not their ultimate goal for Prohibition. They spent the previous decades trying to persuade individuals to stop drinking, to persuade them to stop drinking, while the Anti-Saloon League tried to persuade lawmakers to change the law to prevent drinking. So it was this real distinct difference of personal persuasion. Now, what makes the Women's Christian Temperance Union different than other temperance unions at the time was that Frances Willard had this do everything policy. Now this allowed for individual groups to really pick and choose what they wanted to fight for. So if there was one particular group that was just really gung ho for temperance and that's all they really wanted, then they could do that. But if there was another group that was really passionate about suffrage, they could do that as well. And this allowed to do other things such as public health issues, prison reform, child labor. There is really a 1,000 different ways to advocate for different issues here. So, and they were very departmentalized by that, and this is where I could get off track here because it's just absolutely wild of how many different departments they have and different sections and where they're going, and they were all very, very organized. It's absolutely wild. But they were also very extremely widespread as well. Like I mentioned that they were the largest women's organization in 1890. But they had a WCTU, a World Women's Christian Temperance Union. And then they had national women's Christian temperance unions, and then state and regional, and then local. For example, and one town could have more than one union as well. So for example, Red Wing had 3 women's Christian temperance unions.
Right.
Just in Red Wing. So Hobart and Burnside and Sterling, those were just 3 of the unions. Zumbrota had a union, Goodhue, Pine Island, Kenyon, and Wanamingo, all of those just here in Goodhue County had their own unions. And Winona had 5 women's Christian temperance unions. So I must digress here. I could do a whole thing on just the WCTU. They're awesome. Shout out to the Francis Willard House.
Is that picture taken, the one on the left in Red Wing?
Okay, yeah, so I just forgot. But so this one here, this is a conference convention that was held in Red Wing in the early 1900s. So this was a regional convention. So different unions from around the state came and discussed different temperance issues. And this was actually held here at the First United Methodist Church here in Red Wing. And this one over here, this is also in Goodhue County. I can't remember which one it was from, and I tried so hard to find it. But I'm guessing it was from Zumbrota or Goodhue or Pine Island, Kenyon, or Wanamingo.
Looks like a house in Union. Wow.
Yeah.
Good thing we have evidence.
I think I answered.
So yeah, so this is just another example of just what a typical union might look like at just a gathering. They would have some women together. They would sing, usually sing a hymn, and then they would have somebody give a speech usually, and they would do minutes, and then they would pray, and they would do all of these things. Yeah, we will be here for a while if we keep going on the WCTU. So let's get into grape juice, yeah? So the inventor of Welch's grape juice is this man here in the center, Thomas Welch. He was an English immigrant who was a devout Methodist from a very young age and was a temperance advocate as well. As an adult, he was a dentist. That is where the doctor comes from. And his family hopped from town to town in his early life, but they never really were able to set down roots until much later. And he even, for our Winona contingent, they even landed in Winona for a short time, for about 2 or 3 years. He was a practicing dentist here in southeastern Minnesota. So here in the picture, this is Thomas. This is his son, Charles. This is Charles's son, Edgar. And then this is Edgar's son, Edgar. They liked their names. So this photo was probably taken at his baptism here, only just a few months before he died. With a great intergenerational photo here. So Dr. Welch's unfermented wine is what he originally called his invention. And that was because Thomas Welch invented Welch's grape juice to use as a substitute in communion wine. He was a communion steward at his local Methodist church, and he just found it absolutely terrible that you had an alcoholic substance such as wine in Holy Communion. To him and other temperance advocates, this was a total conflict. There is no way that he could allow this. And to further his resolve, they had a visiting preacher come to his church and stayed with the Welch family, and they had communion. And upon tasting the alcohol, he was overtaken by a strong thirst for drink. And so saddened and inspired, Thomas Welch created a non-alcoholic substitution for sacramental wine, which he calls unfermented wine, Dr. Welch's unfermented wine. He did this by studying winemaking in France, which developed by Louis Pasteur, who developed the pasteurization method. What winemakers would do is they would treat like the crushed grapes that had natural yeasts and sugars. They would boil that, and that would get rid of those yeasts. And then the winemakers would put the yeast back in to different kinds and different levels to create grape flavor. Now, Welch was like, well, what if I just stop after boiling it? And so that's what he did. And so he created a shelf-stable grape juice here. So he simply bottled it up and started selling it as unfermented wine. And so yeah, as a response to alcoholism, he was a brilliant inventor. He had lots of ideas for different things. He created a cough syrup. He created a new way of spelling and his own line of dental tools, since he was a dentist. And all of these were Dr. Welch's neutralizing syrup, Dr. Welch's simplified spelling, Dr. Welch's dental alloy. He really was into the Dr. Welch's thing here. But ultimately, he was not a very good businessman, particularly Welch's went out of business in just 4 years. So he had a lot of these really good ideas to solve problems that came up throughout his life, but he didn't quite have the business skills to follow through. So that's where his son Charles comes in. Charles Welch took over the company in 1875, and what makes Charles different from Thomas is that Charles really understood the importance of advertising. Now, Thomas really was stuck on this idea that the unfermented communion wine was going to be for two main things, and that was for communion wine and also as like a medicine. So it was sold either directly to pastors or it was sold to pharmacies, and it was supposed to kind of be as this tonic. A lot of those really early advertisements are a little snake oil kind of like, that's like, it'll heal all of your ailments. And I'm like, I don't trust you. But Charles really had this idea to kind of spin it in more of like, people can just drink this, like just as like a drink. So the first 10 years were kind of slow, but steady, and he was picking things up. But in 1893 was the big change for Welch's grape juice, because first of all, they changed their name to Welch's grape juice, solidifying the transition from this niche product to a commercial product. And then in 1893, they were a featured product at the Chicago World's Fair. So if you know anything about the Chicago World's Fair, that was the place to be in the world at the time. So millions of people went to the Chicago World's Fair and tried Welch's grape juice for the first time. And, orders were just flying out of the warehouse there. And so because of that, Charles left his dental practice. He was also a dentist, taking after his father. So that also signifies that Charles saw that this was a good enough opportunity that he could leave his day job and do grape juice full time. So the Chicago World's Fair went so well for them that they went to the St. Louis World's Fair, which was in 1904. And that's actually where this picture comes from. And you can really see how big this growth was between 1893 and 1904. Because this whole pavilion was their pavilion at the fair. You can see Welch's grape juice. It's this big thing. People were going in there. They were trying grape juice. They had all these other little stands around this place. They were really kind of creating this kind of this little place for people to come and try their grape juice. So now to kind of look at the advertisements at the time. They focused on a few different things. And one of these was focusing on the purity of Welch's as a juice, but also focusing on the purity of the family as a family unit. So looking back to that, to the Drunkard's Progress, how the family was in the center here. Here's the family right here, and they're all enjoying Welch's grape juice together. So, here is the mother here. She has her hand affectionately here on the shoulder of the father, and then the son here is sitting on the lap of the father. Look how lovely they are. Here's the birthday girl. She's having a great time. Everyone's toasting Welch's to her. And we even have grandma over here. So a nice intergenerational family unit here. Very, very good. And one of the things that they're selling is, yeah, they're selling grape juice, but they're also selling a stability within a family unit. That it's important to see that when you buy Welch's, your family is going to be happy, and we see that a lot in advertisements today too. That's not a new technique by today's standard, but for 1912, when this particular advertisement was in the Ladies' Home Journal, that was pretty new advertising. So, so these full-page advertisements like this were particularly in women's magazines, such as the Ladies' Home Journal or Cosmopolitan, the Red Book magazine. So it was really around 1910 that you started to see these big, large page advertisements, kind of signifying the start of their advertising campaign. So they also had this interesting gender aspect to their advertising, that particularly to women, since women would be the ones who are in charge of selling or buying the grape juice and supplying the family. They're in charge of the meal planning. It makes sense to advertise something like that to the women. So you see that they really only advertise to women as wives and to women as mothers. So you see over here, women as mothers, she is serving Welch's grape juice to her children. And how can assign a better trust than to have somebody serving Welch's grape juice to their children, right? And over here, you see a woman who is preparing Welch's grape juice for her friends. So this is not only the perfect drink for your children, but for your friends as well. This is something that you want. And it even says in these blocks of text here that you should keep a crate of Welch's in your pantry and some in your icebox for just those surprise occasions. Welch's was really having them be the solution to all of these household problems. Do you have surprise guests? Serve Welch's. Do you have sick kids? Serve Welch's, because Welch's is both food and drink. It is very good for kids. Do you have healthy kids? Serve Welch's. So it had they were really targeting women here. And also looking at where these were found as well. As you see that these are both from the Ladies' Home Journal, but this one's from Good Housekeeping. Pardon. So they were in these ladies' magazines, and these advertisements were alongside, how to get stains out of clothes, and how to do this, and how to do that. And very, how to keep house, right? Good housekeeping. And alongside those columns were advertisements for Welch's grape juice. And a lot of the time, any of these in particular have it, but they would have, if you send us a note, we will send you a recipe book. And we actually have one of those recipe books out by our juice stand. And it is 99 ways to make Welch's. And it has everything from drinks to entrees to desserts, both like frozen and kind of baked desserts, anything. And that's particularly saying that you don't have to just drink Welch's. You can make it into a myriad of different ways. They also had free things like a free bottle opener, like a corkscrew, since these were cork bottles.
Yeah.
And they also, still kind of angling the unfermented communion wine kind of angle, they also said that if you give us the name of your pastor, we'll send him some grape juice too. So they were really kind of angling for that audience interaction here. But it wasn't just women that they advertised to men as well. Now these were also in the same type of magazines, but it has a very different tone here. That it's all men in this one in particular, especially in social situations. They're not at home, they're with the guys, right? And it depicts, this one is men drinking together some Welch's and soda water. And it is, and I quote, a man's drink, because it is served plain and the cold and tart sweet taste hits the spot. It is a drink without drug, without drag, and it satisfies the thirst. It is a true tonic without an evil aftermath. So it's here that this is not only a good drink, but it is better than any other drink. And you can really see that it looks like they could be drinking a glass of like whiskey or something like that, especially when they describe it, how it should be served on ice with tonic water. That's exactly like what a cocktail would sound like. But they're saying here that it tastes good and it doesn't have any of the bad consequences, which they were really relying upon, that alcohol is bad because you get drunk. So this is saying that not only is Welch's better, or is Welch's good, but it's better. And it also shows that it appeals to male audiences rather than just women and children, but it also implies that real men, real tough men don't drink alcohol. They drink Welch's. So this is also kind of angling towards women at the same time because it's in those magazines, but this is undeniably a man's drink in this situation. Also, at this time, the Anti-Saloon League was starting to gain more traction as well. And the Anti-Saloon League targeted men, while the Women's Christian Temperance Union targeted women as far as recruiting is concerned. So this added, by making non-alcoholic drinks like this, it gave Welch's more credibility. And it also kind of gave the temperance movement more credibility.
Love the Welch, Welch wagon.
Yep.
Get off.
It's literally get on the bandwagon. Like you kind of
And
see.
when you're on the wagon, and you're not drinking.
Yep. So when we go more into Prohibition here, we start to see more like explicit depictions of Welch's in a social situation. We saw that a couple of slides ago with the woman serving Welch's to her group of ladies. But here we're serving Welch's to a whole social situation. These are women clearly out for a night at the town, and they are drinking Welch's here. So when alcohol became not fashionable to drink, well, it was not fashionable, but it was also illegal during Prohibition, they thought, well, how could we mark a special occasion with a glass of water? We're not going to do that. So the Women's Christian Temperance Union in particular recommended fruit drinks And in 1930, they created the Department of Non-Alcoholic Fruit Products that promoted the use of non-alcoholic fruit beverages and other products to consume more of those and to promote kind of non-alcoholic products. So they set up both state and local, or they set out their army of unions to go and promote those fruit products. And so Welch's was occasionally named specifically in some of their recipe books and things that they sent out. So they, Welch's Grape Juice, happily took upon the task of providing dignified and dry drinks for social occasions. And see, as early as 1901, as we saw before, you see phrases like, these are for your table or for special occasions and for hostesses. But here we have a very specific situation. Here's health and happiness. Sounds like a toast. Here's to health and happiness. But it's also saying, like, here's health and happiness, like here in a glass of Welch's is both health and happiness. So it's again reinforcing this idea that not only is this a good drink for this social situation, but it tastes good, it's healthy for you, and it will make you happy. And this particular advertisement is one of 3 that was in this particular issue of the Ladies' Home Journal. It says in this corner here, although it's kind of hard to read, but it says, this is why everyone is so happy on page 131. So you flip to page 131 and there's a group of people who are also happy, and because they are drinking Welch's. And that one says, turn to page 53. So you turn back to page 53 and it brings you to this page. So it's linking throughout this whole thing. So you don't just see the advertisement, but you see it multiple times and it connects together. So, so this is really what they were doing during Prohibition, really kind of pushing for this idea of Welch's as a drink to use in different social situations. Like the Welch's Ale that we have available today is one of the drinks that they would advertise for an ideal temperance drink. It's simply just Welch's grape juice and ginger ale. They also had, a dozen other ways to make drinks and different fruit punches and freezing it, combining it with other juices, combining it with soda water, just drinking it straight, just all of these different ways they could make Welch's. So following the repeal of Prohibition, what became really popular, especially amongst the people in the Women's Christian Temperance Union, was to host our social freedom parties. They were also called fruestas, which was fruit and fiesta kind of combined. Why they did that is a great question. But it was now that the Prohibition was repealed, they had to justify not drinking. And this was, an hour of social freedom was a time when you did not have to justify why you didn't drink. Nobody was drinking. So, and a lot of the times in these leaflets that the WCTU would hand out, they would name Welch's grape juice specifically by name. So even following Prohibition, Welch's was still the name brand for a good non-alcoholic drink.
What are the years for Prohibition?
So that's 1919 to 1933. So story continues. Charles Welch died in 1926. And his son Edgar Welch tried to keep it going, but he ultimately ended up selling, and it was acquired by the National Grape Cooperative in 1956. And that's the company that still owns Welch's today. And even now, they really have a lot of their roots still in Charles's advertising techniques. You can see now, if you look at a Welch's advertisement, you see You see lots of farmers, lots of family, and a lot of those motifs. Like here, there's a very direct resemblance here. Someone is serving Welch's grape juice on a tray to people in a social situation. I pulled this off of their Facebook page. These advertisements are less than 5 years old. This one here is another intergenerational family scene. Here we have kids, we have what looks like maybe grandparents and parents and cousins in here. It's that same intergenerational thing. And then here we have Welch's is strong, it's tough, it keeps your immune system, it's healthy, tastes good, it's good for you. And here's that same thing. This was linked to that social one. See, for further explanation, see page 103. And see, here's men together drinking Welch's in a social situation. And then here is another feminine social situation. Here are women together, they're having a good time, they're drinking Welch's, it's nice and casual. Same thing here. And this, they're actually made this into a strawberry daiquiri kind of flavor of their sparkling juice, which is still non-alcoholic, which is still very interesting. They could probably pretty easily go into an alcoholic market, but they decide not to, but still angle for, you want strawberry daiquiri, but you don't want alcohol. Well, we got you. So, so still today, their roots in Charles Welch's advertisements are still very, very clear. So, does anybody have any questions?
Someone on Zoom does.
Okay.
Would have men seen the ad in the Good Housekeeping, or were the wives showing it to them?
I think for the most part, it probably would have been the women who were still in charge of buying it. So they would say, hey, you know, this is still good for men. I don't think that many men would be looking in the Ladies' Home Journal or Good Housekeeping, since those were specifically men's, or I mean, rather women's magazines rather. So I'm sure it was just another way to convince women that this was also a men's drink. So it was advertising to men, but it was also advertising for women, because we still have to think about the context that these advertisements are in.
Was the saloon, what was that one called?
The Anti-Saloon League.
Yeah, was that male?
It was mostly male oriented.
Women's.
Yeah, it wasn't like strictly like the Women's Christian Temperance Union. They worked with men. But it was women within their memberships. But the Anti-Saloon League was co-ed, but it had mostly men in the leadership.
And where did that one get its foundation? Was that through the churches or?
It was, I think pretty much any temperance movement is going to have some root in the churches here. But I think it was more of just like a small social organization that kind of grew. Yeah.
Another question is, was Welch's dominant in the market, or were there other drinks that were popular as well?
As far as like a Concord grape juice, which is kind of what we see here with this Welch's here, I think they pretty much dominated the market as far as this grape juice is concerned. I didn't really look into what other competitors were doing, but I think there were other grape juice brands as well, because they had other indications that said, you know, don't just ask for grape juice, ask for Welch's. You know, they were really pushing that. So I think you can kind of see a little insecurity there of making sure that, yeah, we're advertising grape juice, but, you know, make sure to buy our grape juice. Yeah.
Who in Goodhue County was big in temperance?
Who? Julia Nelson was really big in the temperance movement here in the county. She was an abolitionist as well, which is totally tracks with people who were in the temperance movement. A lot of the times, these women were not just in one social movement. So if you were in the temperance, if a woman was in a temperance union, it was likely that they were also active in suffrage, active in prison reform and abolition and all of these other social things as well. But as far as like a big notable name for like Goodhue County, and Julia Nelson is huge.
Now, the Welch name,
Mhm.
where did they live?
So the Welch family lived in Westfield, New York. So that's where Welch's Grape Juice Company now is. That's where their headquarters is. Like I kind of mentioned towards the beginning, in their early life, they moved from here to there to here to there, and kind of back and forth. But they ultimately landed in New York and New Jersey.
When did glass bottles come into play?
Well, they were glass bottles to begin with. Like we go all the way back. Oops. Yeah, this one here. This was
1869.
yeah. So that's when he created the Dr. Welch's unfermented wine the first time. The first.
So he actually had the bottles like that.
Yep. So this is what a bottle would have looked like with Dr. Welch's unfermented wine, pure grape juice, and then it says Vinland, New Jersey or New York, which is where they first started, and then they moved to Westfield.
Thank you.
Mhm.
Is there any family tie to Welch?
I don't think so. No.
And what is that term suffrage? What is that?
So suffrage is the women's right to vote.
Oh.
Yeah.
Okay, a little notable something.
Sure.
I've been a Methodist pastor for almost 30 years now. I do not buy or get the grape juice for communion. Someone else does. I gotta tell you, very rarely do I see anything about this in our church fridge or in communion. So the name
It's
is
dominant.
what's that?
It's dominant.
It's dominant,
Still today.
and I think it's probably because of the roots as well.
Yep, in their advertisement, or advertising has been pretty consistent throughout the years too, that it's like the ultimate temperance drink. It's pure, it's good for you, and it tastes good. You know, it's like those are like the dominant things that you see, you know, over 100 years. Yeah, any other questions?
Please don't spill it on your tea.
Or the
Yeah.
carpet in here.
Right. Yeah. Yeah, so, you know, thanks to everybody on Zoom. If anybody here hasn't had a chance to get some of our refreshments, feel free. Yeah, so thank you all for coming out.